À nos enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé.
You've been given a packet of information to use while you watch the videos in the French Revolution series. Please be sure you listen very carefully, fill in the packet as you go, and you will be able to use that packet in any quiz or Socrative that you'll be taking based upon the videos. That includes an Edpuzzle. I hope you enjoy the French Revolution series. You will remember from our study of the Enlightenment that there were some European monarchs who tried to better the lives of their citizens by instituting some of the principles of the Enlightenment. Joseph II of Austria, for example, the musical king. King Frederick the Great of Prussia, who built an amazing army. And of course, Catherine the Great of Russia, who was a German princess who did a lot with a backward country. The enlightened monarchs, as you will remember, had several things they did, all of them, that wasn't common to their countries. Like, for instance, they all managed to get some sort of religious tolerance into their nations. They brought in agricultural improvements, which expanded the lives of their people. And of course, they tried to ease the taxes that were primarily paid for by the poor people in their countries. They weren't always successful, but hey, they tried, right? Nowhere was the divide between the rich and the poor greater than in France. The French political system was known as the Old Regime. The French aristocracy was among the wealthiest in all of Europe. They controlled large areas of land, huge amounts of money, and had power that was not controlled by a parliament, unlike in Great Britain. The poor in France had been abused, mistreated, and ignored. They had been forced to work on the estates of the wealthy with very little pay and in terrible conditions. They were starving, sick, dirty, tired, and growing more resentful with each passing year. Using this political cartoon, we're going to look at how French society was divided into three separate classes known as the estates, and this was prior to the Revolution, of course. The first estate was made up of the religious leaders who were in charge of the church. While these individuals made up only 1% of the total population, they controlled almost 10% of the land in France. This land brought them a great deal of wealth from the products produced on it and in the form of rent from peasants. Those who belonged to this estate also received a tithe, or 10% of all the earnings of those who lived on their land. This tithing was supposed to be utilized to run the church. However, it was often used to fund the extravagant lifestyles of those who belonged to the first estate. The second estate of French society was made up of the nobility. These nobles lived on manors they had inherited. The second estate consisted of about 2% of the total population who owned about 25% of the total land in France. These nobles collected dues and rent from the peasants who lived on their land, just like the church. This endless source of income allowed them to live a lavish lifestyle, particularly at the court of Versailles. Remember, Louis XIV convinced them to spend money for the privilege of waiting on the royal family personally. The third estate was by far the largest social group in France. It made up nearly 97% of the population. It contained the bourgeoisie, which were business owners and merchants, urban workers, and tradesmen, but mostly peasants. Members of this estate had few rights and little political power. Life was difficult, and it was nearly impossible for them to get ahead. Members of the third estate were required to pay a 10% tithe to the church, dues to their feudal lord, and a land tax to the king. This left them with little to support their families. The Estates General was a representative group composed of people representing each of the three social estates in France. Their job was very similar to England's Parliament. They were called when the king needed money, and France's kings, like the British kings, found ways to not call them. In fact, the last time they were called together was in 1610. In 1774, Louis XVI, age 19, became King of France. His 18-year-old wife was Marie Antoinette, sister of enlightened monarch, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II of Austria. Louis XVI inherited a massive amount of debt from his father, Louis XV, and his grandfather, Louis XIV. He made the debt worse by supporting the American Revolution because, well, France and Britain have always been bitter rivals. King Louis XVI became desperate to raise money, and he decided that he would tax the first and second estates. Without their consent, he placed taxes on them. Now, they had always been exempt from paying taxes before, so naturally, the two estates flatly refused to pay. Stay tuned for part 2 to find out what happens to Louis XVI when he no longer plays nice with the old regime.